Hey guys, how's it going, Companion? So today I kind of want to talk about and show you guys some of my thoughts on the really aggressive stuff that's been happening in Hearthstone really for a long time now, but we're really getting to see it now that the Grim Patron Warrior is out of the meta from the Warsong Commander nerf. Grim Patron Warrior was a pretty unfair deck, but it was unfair on turn 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, maybe sometimes a little bit later than that, because, well, it was a little bit too overpowered and there weren't many counters for it. But, under those guidelines, I thought that the deck was a little bit broken. I did not disagree with nerfing the deck. I disagreed with the actual implementation of the nerf because they made a card completely really worse than useless if you consider the arena format. Of course, Warsong Commander is what I'm talking about. But that aside, from that change, a lot of the more aggressive decks have kind of pushed into the scene. They've pushed into the meta, and they've done so because it's really hard to counter aggressive decks. It's really hard to actually counter decks that just flood the board and go all in. Because in Constructed, where you can refine this to such a crazy degree, it becomes really almost unstoppable. And I've experienced in some games, because I've played Constructed a little bit lately, I've experienced turn 4 losses, turn 5 losses, turn 6 losses. And I mean, really, a lot of the time, it is turn 6 or 7 losses. And I just find that a little bit absurd because, when you consider the counters to aggressive decks, they don't really work. Most of the counters to aggressive decks that people use are what? Like Antique Healbot. What is Antique Healbot gonna do when you die on turn 4? Antique Healbot also won't save you when, you have to play it on turn 5 to stay alive because it's too low of a tempo swing. Same goes for turn 6. You probably won't have a 1-drop in that deck. So, Antique Healbot, this starts to become useful on turn 7. A lot of the old school control mechanics aren't even regarded as such. Guardian of Kings, turn 7 heal for 6. Yeah, right, these days, right? Lay on Hands doesn't even cut it. The only reason mid-range / control pal is even a thing is not because of its control cards, which yes, it has very good ones comparatively to other classes, but really they suck. And the reason that it's good control class at all is because it has efficient aggressive cards like Muster for Battle. So, this type of theme has been ongoing. This type of theme where good control decks work because they have good aggressive cards to combat aggressive cards of other decks really doesn't work with the counterplay. It doesn't work with combo beats control, control beats aggro, aggro beats it doesn't, in that cycle, in the natural cycle of card games that used to exist in Hearthstone a year plus ago, that's completely gone these days. In fact, it was the combo deck, it was the Grim Patron Warrior that was controlling the aggressive deck. So it's a little bit of a mess, and I kind of thought about it, and I think I've kind of figured out where the things are missing. So there are a few class tools that work defensively against aggressive decks, but as I mentioned, on one hand, they're usually aggressive cards on their own, like Muster for Battle. I think that's a very good example. It's a very defensive card, but when you put a card like that in the game, people are also going to run it and play extremely aggressive Paladin decks because you also help the aggressive decks. So there's actually very few cards in the game that help control decks and don't help aggro decks. And there's so few, and they're basically forgotten, largely because they were implemented in the game 2 years ago. And I'm not kidding. I took a look at all the cards that really crush aggressive decks, and we have, I guess, Zombie Chow. I mean, I say I guess Zombie Chow because, it works in a lot of cases, but it doesn't always work if your opponent has, a 1-drop and goes first, and then, 2 1-drops, or kills your Zombie Chow with, a Glaive Zuker. It sometimes is not even enough. Then you have cards like Unstable Ghoul, which, we saw it work against aggressive decks in the Grim Patron deck, but it's not really a good enough card to use in just every control deck because it's very difficult to synergize properly. The Grim Patron Warrior was a very unique deck where it was able to perform this, and that's kind of why it worked, is because it was able to use some of the good defensive tools in the game. Another one is Deathlord. Deathlord has seen some use, not too much lately. It is still a good card in Priest because it synergizes very well with health buffs like Velen's Chosen. It doesn't really work in any other deck, but it's still there as a tool that sometimes gets rolled in if things get absurdly aggressive. And other cards, you get like Sludge Belcher, but Sludge Belcher really doesn't do the trick anymore because the really aggressive decks usually run 2 silences or 2 ways to remove your stuff. And if you're all in on a Sludge Belcher on turn 5, you can bet your ass you're going to lose that game anyway. So, what did I just talk about? I just talked about 4 Naxx cards. GVG really didn't introduce a single card that only works towards the control side in the first few turns of the game that are really the only relevant ones these days. It only introduced aggressive cards or cards for both control and aggressive decks. And the other expansions, they just kind of rolled out mediocre control cards. Like control cards, but they don't actually help control decks stop aggro decks from rolling them over. There are a few exceptions, but they're generally like class-based. Like Wormrest Agent does a really good job of controlling some of the early game stuff, but that's a priest card. Not only is it a priest card, it's a Dragon Priest card. And yeah, Dragon Priest is okay against aggressive decks, but you know what? Control Priest also did okay against aggressive decks. So it didn't actually change up the game in any way. So this is kind of what we need. We really need cards in the game that are good early game for control decks that don't actually help aggro decks very much, or at all, hopefully. And it seems that this concept is largely forgotten. Naxxramas was really the only time where this concept moved forward, but Naxxramas was also a time where there was a crazy amount of tempo aggressive and sticky minion push. So in Naxxramas, we had super aggressive minions and super defensive minions. And, the game maybe got a little bit more aggressive. The aggressive ones were actually a little bit more powerful than the only defensive tools we got. But in all the other expansions, either, control decks got cards that were below the existing power level, or aggressive decks just got aggressive cards. So it was completely one-sided. And here we are today where we basically have no real answer to these aggressive decks. There's a few decks that work here and there, but it's much easier to counter a control deck than it is to counter an aggressive deck. And, well, I just think that is a little bit bad. We've seen Blizzard try to fix this in TGT by not introducing any aggressive cards, but that didn't really do it because they didn't actually introduce any defensive cards at the required power level that they needed to be. So, here we are. You play Hearthstone, it's a great game, but in Constructed, well, you can expect to get your ass beat on turn 5s and 6 a lot of the time. So that's kind of how it is. BlizzCon coming up, I'm hoping that Blizzard kind of combats this idea, because I'm at least hoping that we slow down Hearthstone into a mid-range game. The mid-range game, in my opinion, is probably the most interesting, but we're still pretty far away from that. I wanted to leave you guys off with what I consider the most bullshit, aggressive loss that I've had in the last few weeks, just so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Take a look at the game I'm about to show you guys, and consider, is it really more fair than Grim Patron? Think about it. Enjoy, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Honestly, I don't know if I can hope for a better hand than that. Oh, crap. Holy shit. Savage roar time. Okay. Clean into molten range, right? If you got me to 13, you might as well go all the way. Okay. What the fuck is that? Really? The druid 1 turn 4 without using the coin.